On October 12, 1972, 45 people boarded a flight from Uruguay to Chile for a weekend trip. The group consisted mostly of an amateur rugby team, their friends, and family members heading to a friendly match in Santiago. The crossing required a military-chartered Fairchild turboprop to navigate the Planchon Pass. This specific route through the Andes is known for sudden, unpredictable weather shifts that can turn a routine flight into a navigational nightmare. This graph compares the plane's flight path to the elevation of the hidden peaks. Relying on dead reckoning, the co-pilot descended early. Alarms gave seconds of warning before the tail slammed into the ridge, pulling passengers into the void as the fuselage disintegrated. The main body of the aircraft struck a glacier and began a high-speed 200-mile-per-hour slide down the ice. The passengers were suddenly evicted from the safety of the cabin and dropped into a completely inhospitable wasteland. While 33 people survived the initial crash, they were now stranded at 11,000 feet. They were isolated in one of the most rugged and lethal mountain ranges on the planet. The group possessed almost nothing required for high-altitude survival. They were wearing light clothing, had no medical kits, and their entire food supply was limited to a few snacks and several bottles of wine. During that first night, temperatures dropped so incredibly low that 5 more passengers died from exposure before the sun rose. The survivors had to immediately repurpose the wreckage. They began re-engineering the fuselage from a transport vessel into their only shield against an environment that was actively killing them. Using debris from the cabin, medical students Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino improvised splints for shattered limbs. To trap heat and block the wind, the group stacked suitcases and seat cushions into a crude wall to seal the fuselage. 8 days into the ordeal, they managed to pick up a radio signal. They listened as a broadcast confirmed the news they feared. The official search for Flight 571 had been called off. The realization that rescue was no longer coming forced a total shift in their mindset. They had to transition from waiting for external help to becoming a self-sufficient society responsible for every facet of their own survival. This institutional failure meant they were truly on their own. Every mechanism for staying alive, from water production to medical care, would have to be invented by the people inside the wreckage. This chart tracks the biological reality of starvation at altitude. By day 10, their food intake hit 0, while the calories required to maintain body heat in sub-zero temperatures remained high. Their bodies were beginning to break down their own tissues for energy. With no animal or plant life available, the group faced a terminal choice. Roberto Canessa explained the medical necessity of consuming the bodies of those who had already died in the crash. The survivors reached a collective agreement based on the idea of ultimate sacrifice. They pledged to one another that if they died, their own bodies would be used to sustain the others. Just as they secured their food source, a massive avalanche struck the mountain in the middle of the night. It buried the fuselage under tons of snow, trapping the group in total darkness for days and killing 8 more people. The avalanche proved that the wreckage was a trap. They realized that the mountain would eventually kill everyone who remained at the crash site unless they took proactive steps to escape. To prepare for a trek out of the mountains, they stripped the insulation from the plane's air conditioning system. Using a small sewing kit, they fabricated a 3-person sleeping bag to protect themselves during nights on the open ice. Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa began an impossible climb up a 15,000-foot peak. They had no mountaineering equipment or supplemental oxygen, and their bodies were severely weakened by months of hunger. The 10-day journey required them to navigate vertical ridges and waist-deep snow. At the summit, they discovered the mountains were far wider than they thought, leading them to send their third companion, Vicentin, back to the wreck so they could use his rations for the remaining distance. Every foot of progress across the ridge was a result of agonizing physical force. Parrado and Canessa replaced their reliance on luck with a sheer, exhausting effort to walk themselves back to civilization. After 10 days of trekking, the snow finally gave way to vegetation. They eventually reached a riverbank where they spotted a Chilean herdsman, Sergio Catalan, on the far side of the water. Because the river was too loud for shouting, Parrado scribbled a note explaining that they were from the crashed plane and had 14 friends still waiting for help. He tied the paper to a rock and threw it across the water. Catalan raised the alarm, and 72 days after the Fairchild disappeared, helicopters reached the crash site. Only 16 people were found alive and brought down from the mountains. The survivors were honest with the world about how they stayed alive. They described their actions as a final act of communion and a tribute to the friends who had enabled their survival through their own deaths. Flight 571 remains a study in what happens when every external system fails. It demonstrates that when technology and institutions vanish, the most effective survival tool is human adaptability and the stubborn will to keep moving.